I feel truly privileged and humbled to be invited here tonight to share our personal story. And as David mentioned, my husband Ralph is also here with us tonight. Please forgive me, I've got a few notes. I'd just like to hang on to them as a bit of a security blanket, but I hope that it's personal and touches your heart. Firstly, I'm a mother. Mum to Thomas, Madeline and Stuart. And being their mother has been my life for the last 25 years. Something extraordinary happens when you have a child, as many of you would know here tonight. It's an unconditional love, and there is absolutely nothing you wouldn't do for your child. As parents, we all have hopes and dreams for our children, and I had that too, but I often feared for their safety as they headed out into the world as young adults. I'm sure many of you spend countless hours worrying about your children. Now, our eldest child, Thomas, was 18 years old. He just finished school and was heading out on his first night in Sydney. He was working full-time for an accounting firm and studying at university part-time. And he was full of passion for his life ahead. 8 months later, as I said, he was heading out for his first night in Sydney, and he was celebrating a new colleague and friend's 18th birthday party. And that Saturday afternoon, I called Tom and I said to him, have a great time and take care, and I love you. And he said, I love you too, Mum. And those were his last words to me. It was school holidays and we were at home in the Southern Highlands with our two younger children. We were getting ready for bed when the phone rang at 10:25 p.m. and I thought it would probably be Thomas asking for some kind of directions. I answered the phone and a man from St Vincent's Hospital said that Thomas had been attacked and that we needed to come to Sydney immediately. It was around midnight when we arrived, and we were met by two police officers out the front of St Vincent's Hospital, and they asked if we were Mr and Mrs Kelly. And I think at that point I just wanted to go in and see our son, but Ralph really knew that something must be terribly wrong. We were taken past the emergency into a small room out the back, and we were met by the registrar, who told us that it would really take a miracle for Thomas to survive. He was in surgery, they were operating on his brain to relieve the pressure, and it was about 4 a.m. when we finally got in to see him. And I can't tell you what it's like to see a young, strong, beautiful young man lying there in a hospital bed. His hair was covered with his own blood, and there was machines keeping him alive. The following morning, the ICU doctor that came on duty took us aside and she said, I'm 100% certain that Thomas's brain has died. So we sat with Thomas for the next 2 days, begging for him to fight. But at the end of those 2 days, we held Thomas tightly as the life support was removed. At first, his heartbeat was really strong, but eventually it started to begin to slow down, and we watched our son and brother turn blue and suffocate in front of us. Later that night, we went back to the hospital to identify Thomas's body after his organ donation. And the two police officers that were with us were weeping. One of them said to us, I have 3 children the same ages as yours. The next day, we were asked by the New South Wales Police to go to their headquarters to do a live interview. And for that reason, they really wanted us to speak to the general public to see whether or not they could get some lead as to find out who had done this to Thomas. Later that day, we returned home to the country with one less child. We lived our lives from that time in despair and disbelief, and life to us was like living in a fog, meeting and greeting the many people that came by our house to try and give us a helping hand. After a few months, Ralph and a dear friend of ours who kept pestering him to do something started to reach out to people to understand how this could happen to a young man in Sydney. He met with the New South Wales Police Commissioner, the head of homicide, politicians, doctors and many others. And from this point, our grief started to turn into determination. When we looked at the harms of alcohol, we learned that it causes 24,000 victims of domestic violence, 20,000 victims of child abuse, 175,000 hospitalisations, 5,500 deaths, that's 15 deaths a day, and the cost to Australian people is $15 billion. So those figures are extraordinary. From here, we began to advocate for change and preventative programs. So in September 2013, we launched the Thomas Kelly Youth Foundation as a legacy to Tom. And at its heart, the foundation is about ensuring that all of our children are safe. Thomas was known as TK amongst his friends, and our platform around behavioural change took on the name Take Care, spelling care with a K. In December 2014, we commenced the first Take Kare Safe Space in Sydney. And our volunteers, our ambassadors, they work through the night every Friday and Saturday night in conditions like this and worse, from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. They walk through the streets of Sydney, they operate a tented area, and they help young people get home safely. They hand out water, thongs to young women who can't walk in their heels anymore, and they provide a place for them to charge their phones, get in contact with their family and friends, and as I said, to just sober up if they need that as well. Many times they've saved young women from sexual assault, and there have often been moments where they have saved people's lives. We now have 3 safe space locations in Sydney, and in just over 4.5 years, we've assisted 68,000 young people. We call these sliding door moments, the difference in these young people having their night turn into something horrific or actually continuing on as normal and getting home. The Safe Space program, along with changes to legislation introduced in early 2014, has had significant outcomes. The hospital that Thomas was admitted to, St Vincent's, is one of the largest Sydney hospitals, and it has not had a single death due to a serious brain injury admission since. When Thomas was killed, there were neurosurgeons on standby every single weekend. Countless sons and daughters have been spared from becoming victims like Thomas. And as a community, we need to know that we have to foster behavioural change in our youth to create a responsible drinking culture and ultimately a safer and healthier Australia. Whilst learning to live with our grief, start a foundation and care for our 2 younger remaining children, we had a long and painful experience going through the New South Wales courts. It took 3 years from the local court through to the Supreme Court, the Court of Criminal Appeal, and finally the High Court of Australia, before our ordeal was finally over. There's been some significant changes that have been introduced following our battle. The one-punch law in New South Wales was introduced, and that's been a great educational tool for our young people. They're talking about it in schools and in universities, and so our youth and people should know now that if you kill someone as a result of a violent punch, you will spend a minimum of 8 years in prison. So it's a good learning tool. Victim impact statements are now being admissible when passing sentence. Non-domestic acts of violence under the influence of alcohol are no longer an excuse. And the introduction of a financial hardship program to assist families until they get back on their feet. And the foundation has now partnered with 3 Sydney universities. But in February 2016, the New South Wales government began the process of reviewing the lockout laws, which they had introduced 2 years earlier. And these include amendments to liquor legislation. The changes that occurred in Sydney's life were a result of Thomas's death and another young man 12 months later, Daniel Christie, who was also 18. The community had had enough of violence, and along with the review, our family came under intense scrutiny by certain members of the general public. There were 3 prominent businessmen who did not support the lockout laws and were behind a number of blogs and untruthful articles that were published both online and in a prominent Sydney newspaper. And as a result of this, our family received death threats and hateful messages on social media. Some of them were things like, "Let's kill off the rest of the Kelly dogs." Thomas would be rolling over in his grave, and Stuart Kelly is a political puppet. I think people soon forget what people go through and what we have been through. Our innocent son was murdered without any confrontation. He stepped out of a taxi and moments later was punched in the face. We were told to turn off his life support, and at that time our other children were just 14 and 17 years old. Our youngest son, Stuart, commenced at St Paul's Residential College, which is part of the University of Sydney, in February 2016. Stuart had taken a stance against alcohol abuse and violence when he gave a speech at a fundraising dinner for our foundation the previous year. 18 to 25-year-olds are the main sector affected by the lockout laws, and they were left feeling angry that their rights to drink 24 hours a day whenever they wanted to drink had been selfishly taken away from them. Stuart called us 12 hours after we had left him at the college. We missed his first few calls, but later that afternoon he rang again and he asked us to come and collect him outside Royal Prince Alfred Medical Centre. I was immediately alarmed and said, was he okay? And he said, just come and get me. When we arrived, we found him sitting in the gutter with his head in his hands. He got in the car and he began to sob uncontrollably. I hadn't seen him cry like that since Thomas's life support had been switched off. So we drove him home as we knew we had to get him somewhere where he felt safe. We tried over the next few months to find out what had happened to him that night, but to this day we still don't know, and there is currently a police investigation still underway. But whatever happened to our son that night, seeing him retreat into his room for the next 2.5 months was obviously catastrophic. He went there a happy-go-lucky boy one day, and he came home the next, and his life had changed. That was in February. On the 25th of July, a few months later, Stuart took his life. To this day, we still can't understand, not for one moment did we believe that Stuart's life would come to this. Losing both our beautiful boys at the same age as 18 and a half, it's incomprehensible. And I won't say that everything's okay, because it's not really, and there are lots and lots of days that I don't want to be here, living this life without my sons. But we have a gorgeous, almost 24-year-old daughter, Madeline. We're so proud of her, and we have to stay strong, not only for her, but we need to live our lives for the love of her brothers, our sons. Now, Stuart had never had a day of depression that we had seen in his life. I know he must have been suffering silently. It always sits there, that grief under the surface of your skin. But he had an extraordinary final year at the school he went to in Sydney. He was head of his boarding house, he was a school prefect, and he had lots and lots of friends. He was a leader and innocently took a stance against violence when he was old enough to make that choice. He loved and missed his brother, and he wanted kids his age to know that things weren't okay and they needed to band together to bring about change. Now, we lose 3,500 Australians to suicide every year, and I believe that equates to 8 deaths a day and an attempt every 8 minutes. Why do we have somewhere around the vicinity of 70,000 attempts a year? We've learned since losing Stuart that about 50% of those who take their lives do not seek medical intervention or speak about their feelings. They don't necessarily always have a mental illness. They may just be going about their lives living just as they do, and someone thinks it's okay to bully them or ridicule them. Some have been touched by tragedy, culturally displaced, or found themselves in financial ruin. These things may result in despair and find that person feeling that there is no hope. But there is always hope. Stuart, whilst mature for his years, couldn't see that tomorrow could be better and brighter, and that people would soon forget about Thomas and the lockout laws. And the ripple effect of Tom's murder resulted in the death of our other son, and I have no doubt about that. Now, many of you here tonight have been touched by suicide. This is the beginning of change. We need to talk and we need to listen. We need to understand it's okay not to be okay, and that we are not the only ones, and there are people there that will help. Having the opportunity to talk about my boys and have people listen is what has kept me going. Without it, I'm not sure where I would be today. And it's because of this and the fact that Stuart would not talk to us about how he was feeling that I now know how important this is. When a person is suffering, they need to have someone that they can truly talk to, who will listen, offer advice if they can, and show that person that they are needed and that they are loved. And if you don't know what to say, I've found that a hug says everything. We need to be open and honest with our children and those around us. We need to have those conversations around difficult subjects. We need to make sure our kids know that bullying, violence and being unkind is just unacceptable. Children need encouragement, and we need to lead our discussions and actions by example. Be a good listener and let others do the talking. And no matter how young or old, everyone deserves to be valued and shown respect. After losing Stuart, we found ourselves wondering what it was that we could do to increase awareness around suicide, particularly in our youth. How could we encourage those suffering to speak up and others to listen to those around us who really need support? Today, our foundation is focused on building awareness around the issues that affect our children and those generations that follow. We're reaching out to the community to try to change people's values for the better. We established a second platform after losing Stuart, and as we've done with Tom and Take Care, we used Stuart's initials and called the program Stay Kind. This year we've begun our national campaign of kindness, and we've recently rebranded our foundation as staykind.org. It's much easier to remember than our original name. It has a positive message, and it also gives our daughter the opportunity to live both her personal and professional life without seeing her brothers' names come up in the press from time to time. Now, there are approximately 25 million Australians. We worked out, with the help of a calculator, that if we could all show at least one act of kindness per day, that would equate to over 9 billion acts of kindness a year. Imagine how together we could change the world with kindness. We can bring it into our homes by telling our children what we did as parents that was kind. Simple things like letting a car in front of us, smiling at somebody, saying hello, paying a favour forward. And then we can ask our children that night what they did that day that was kind at school. I think we should all just try it. Next month, the newly appointed Governor-General, the Honourable David Hurley, has agreed to be the patron of Kind July. We're asking all Australians to go to our website and pledge an act of kindness. Then share it any way you can through social media, your community, at work and at home. And you can do this anytime. It doesn't have to be during July, but July is great. Anytime after that, now. I truly believe that the shocking tragedies that our family has endured could have and should have never happened. It's time for proactive change. My generation, your generation, can start a movement that allows your children to grow up with kindness as the norm. Each of you here tonight has the power to build something positive, inspire others, and maximise every opportunity in your lives. So I leave you with this. Remember, if we each do our part with small acts of kindness, together we will see big impacts. Let's nurture each other, be kind, stay kind, and see what happens. Thank you.